Flour was everywhere. On the table, on the floor, on the curtains, and in Bryony Roberts' hair. There was even flour on Ingo. "You look like a little polar bear," Bryony giggled, looking down at him. She brushed her hands clean before peering into the oven. "I think they're nearly done." Ingo loved it when Bryony baked. The kitchen would fill with the smell of sweet treats, one of which would accidentally end up on the floor for him to try. This time it was shortbread, especially for Granny Martha, who wasn't feeling too well. Bryony's parents had gone shopping that morning, so just before they left, Mrs. Roberts had fetched all the ingredients from the pantry, propped open a recipe book on the table, and left them to it. But now Bryony heard the keys jangling in the lock. "Quick, Ingo," she said. "Look at all this mess. We've got to get it cleaned up." They got to work immediately, Bryony shaking out the curtains and Ingo furiously licking the floor. The flour didn't taste very nice and it made him sneeze, but he knew how scary Mr. Roberts could be when he came home to find mess. So Ingo kept working until the floor was spotless. He had just snaffled up the last patch of flour when the door burst open. "Hello, dear. How are you getting on?" asked Bryony's mother. "Fine, thank you. The biscuits are just cooling off now," Bryony replied. Her father appeared at the doorway. "Smells delicious. And no mess. Well done, darling." Mrs. Roberts fetched a tin, and they packed up the biscuits. "Now, Bryony," she said, "do you remember how to get to Granny Martha's?" Take the number 43 bus to Archway, cross the road, turn right, and then..." Bryony trailed off. "Through the park, down the alley to St. John's Way, number 12 with the big red door," Mrs. Roberts finished. "And don't let that blinking dog be a nuisance," warned Mr. Roberts, looking down at Ingo, who avoided his gaze. "Quickly now, or you'll miss the next bus." Bryony's mother held out Ingo's lead. Bryony grabbed it along with the biscuit tin, and the two of them dashed down the hallway and out of the front door. "Don't worry about father," Bryony said in between breaths. She was walking as fast as she could. "He likes you, really." They rounded the corner at the end of the road, just in time to see the bus pulling away. "Quickly, Ingo, the next one isn't for 20 minutes, Bryony exclaimed, breaking into a sprint. She leapt for the bus and just managed to grab onto the pole, swinging herself aboard while clinging tightly to the biscuit tin. Seconds later, Ingo landed in her arms and licked her face. "Ingo, you nearly knocked me over." Bryony struggled to keep her balance as the bus moved on down the road. "But I'm glad you made it. I hate taking the bus alone." They made their way up to the top deck and had barely sat down when... "Oi! Get that mangy-looking dog off the seat!" Bryony looked up to see the red, moustached face of an angry conductor looming over her, shaking his finger at Ingo. "Sorry, sir. Come on, Ingo, do as the man says," said Bryony, tugging on his collar. "How many stops to Archway, please?" 9, replied the conductor, "and that'll be 6pence. Bryony fetched her purse out of her pocket and handed over a little silver coin. Once the conductor had made his way back downstairs, Bryony shifted forward on the seat, then whispered to Ingo, "Come on then, up here. Make sure you stay behind me, out of sight." He hopped up into the gap and settled down to enjoy the journey. Ingo loved to ride the bus. He loved looking out of the window at all the people passing by. He loved watching the huge horses pulling carts full of apples, and he especially loved seeing the giggling children playing in the street. Ingo had always preferred children. They were kind to him and spoke softly, unlike the adults who would often shout at him to "Get your muddy paws off that chair," or "Stop rooting around in that bin." And of all the children Ingo had met, he loved Bryony the most. 25 minutes later, and the bus pulled into Archway. Bryony hopped off with Ingo at her feet. "Thank you," she called over her shoulder. "Now then, Ingo, do you remember the way?" Ingo cocked his ears, listening to Bryony intently. "Across the road, turn right. Let's start with that bit, shall we?" She waited till the bus had moved off before stepping down into the road, but after just a couple of steps she felt a tugging on the lead. She turned to see Ingo rooted to the spot, quaking with fear. "Not now, Ingo," Bryony sighed. "Look, there's nothing to be scared of. Quick, whilst the road is clear." She pulled on the lead, but Ingo pulled back, refusing to step off the pavement. She pulled harder, but Ingo wouldn't budge. He was surprisingly strong for his size, and Bryony knew she was fighting a losing battle. Once Ingo had decided something scared him, there was nothing you could do to make him think otherwise. She had just loosened her grip on the lead when a horn startled her, and she turned to see another bus bearing down on her, the driver's face agape with horror. There was a shout, a screeching of brakes, Bryony screamed, and the biscuit tin came clattering down to the ground. It was all too much for Ingo. He bolted, running as fast as he could, the lead streaming along behind him like a scarf caught in the wind. He dodged between legs, leapt over fruit crates, and disappeared around a corner. Bryony called after him, "Ingo! Ingo!" But it was pointless. He had been spooked like this before, and she knew it could be hours before he'd calmed down enough for her to catch him. She looked down at the biscuit tin, its contents strewn across the pavement, and felt tears welling up in her eyes. Slumping down onto her knees, she began to sob. This was supposed to be a simple trip, and everything had gone wrong. "Oh, Ingo," she sighed to herself. "If only you were a little bit braver." The end.